What happens when the line you're never meant to cross is the very one your heart keeps leading you toward? The classroom was supposed to be empty. By that hour, the corridors of the old building had already fallen silent, the chatter of students replaced by the steady hum of the ceiling fans and the faint smell of chalk dust clinging to the air. But I stayed behind, papers spread out across my desk, pretending to review notes I had already memorized 100 times. The truth was simpler. I didn't want to leave just yet. I heard her before I saw her. The soft rhythm of heels against the tiled floor, unhurried, deliberate, almost echoing in the stillness. When she appeared in the doorway, the faint glow from the setting sun caught the edges of her hair, making it shimmer like strands of gold threaded with quiet wisdom. She was my teacher, 40, maybe 45, with a posture that carried authority, yet eyes that carried something gentler, something I had never dared to name. Her gaze swept across the room, finding me hunched over my notes. "You shouldn't be here this late," she said, her tone calm, but layered with that familiar firmness. "The rules are clear. Students aren't allowed to stay after hours without permission." I looked up, trying to appear casual though my chest felt tight. "Then maybe tonight," I murmured, half a smile tugging at my lips, "we should break them together." For a moment, the words hung there, heavier than I intended. I expected her to frown, to remind me again of the line between us. Instead, she simply tilted her head, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Her lips parted slightly, as if a reply was on its way, but she said nothing. The silence between us was louder than any scolding could have been. She stepped inside, her hand brushing lightly across the edge of my desk as she passed, leaving the faintest whisper of touch against the wood. I caught the subtle fragrance of her perfume, elegant, understated, the kind of scent that lingers without demanding attention. She gathered a few of my scattered books, stacking them neatly as though order could undo the weight of my careless words. Our hands met for the briefest instant when I reached for the same notebook. It was an accident, of course, but in that fleeting contact, I felt the warmth of her skin, steady and grounding. She didn't pull away at once. Neither did I. The moment was small enough to be ignored, yet large enough to echo in my chest long after. "Rules exist for a reason," she finally said, her voice softer now, carrying more weariness than warning. "And sometimes," I replied gently, meeting her gaze, "reasons change." Her eyes lingered on mine longer than they should have, long enough for me to notice the faintest shadow of a smile forming at the corner of her lips. Then, just as quickly, it vanished, replaced with the composed expression she always wore. That was how it began, not with declarations, not with grand gestures, but with a single broken rule and the silence that told us both it would not be the last. The classroom lights flickered as I packed my things, yet I could feel her presence even before I looked up. She hadn't left. Instead, she moved closer, gathering the last of the scattered papers, her fingers smoothing the edges as if tidiness could erase the tension that lingered between us. When she handed the stack back to me, our hands brushed again, light as a whisper. This time it wasn't an accident, or at least it didn't feel like one. A warmth spread through my chest, unspoken but undeniable, before she gently withdrew and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice, when it came, was softer than before. "Come on, let me walk you out. It's too late for you to be here alone." There was nothing extraordinary about those words, but the way she said them, the faint hesitation in her tone, made them feel like something more. I followed her into the hallway, and the sound of our footsteps echoed down the empty corridor, a rhythm that belonged only to the two of us. The building was hushed, abandoned for the night, with rows of lockers standing like silent witnesses to the rule we had already bent. The air smelled faintly of floor polish and old books, but through it all lingered the gentle trace of her perfume, that same subtle fragrance that stayed just long enough to leave me searching for it after it was gone. At the doorway, she paused. A cool breeze slipped in through the glass panels, stirring the edge of her blouse, carrying the scent of rain that had fallen earlier that evening. She reached out to push the heavy door open, and as she did, she steadied me instinctively, her hand resting briefly on my arm. It was nothing, really, just a small gesture. Yet it sent a quiet shiver through me. Her touch wasn't firm, only guiding, but left a warmth that lingered long after her hand slipped away. I looked at her then, really looked, and saw the faint weariness around her eyes, the kind that comes not from age but from carrying too much responsibility. And still, she carried it with grace. We stepped outside together. The campus stretched wide and empty, washed in silver from the moonlight that broke through the drifting clouds. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, though. It was alive, threaded with things we both wanted to say, but hadn't found the courage for. At the gate, she stopped again. Her hand hovered on the iron handle, but she didn't push it open just yet. Instead, she looked at me, her eyes unreadable in the dim light. "You should go home," she whispered. I nodded, though part of me wished she had said anything else. And yet, in the way her gaze lingered, in the way her breath caught before she looked away, I knew she was holding back just as much as I was. We stood there, suspended in that pause, as though neither of us wanted to be the first to break it. And maybe, in that hesitation, we both understood. This wasn't the end of a late-night walk. It was the beginning of something neither of us dared name aloud. The next day, it wasn't the classroom where we met again. Instead, it was the quiet of the faculty lounge, a place I had never really belonged but somehow found myself invited into. She stood by the coffee machine, her hair loosely pinned, a few strands falling free, as though even she had stopped trying to control them. When she noticed me lingering at the doorway, she hesitated for a moment before gesturing with a faint smile. "Come in. You look like you need something stronger than library air." I laughed softly, the sound breaking the stillness of the room, and stepped inside. She poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, sliding one across the table toward me. Her fingers lingered against the porcelain, almost as if she were reluctant to let go, and for a fleeting second, I imagined she was offering something far heavier than caffeine. We sat across from each other, the space between us smaller than it should have been. The lounge was dim, lit only by a single overhead light that hummed faintly. Outside, dusk had begun to settle, painting the windows in shades of deepening blue. She wrapped both hands around her cup, staring into the dark liquid as though it held answers she hadn't yet found. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "People think teaching is about knowledge, about control. But most days it feels like endurance." She paused, her thumb tracing the rim of her mug, her shoulders tightening ever so slightly. "The rules, the expectations, they don't leave much space for..." Her admission hung between us, fragile and unguarded. I had always seen her as unshakable, confident, precise, unbending. Yet here she was, revealing the weariness beneath the surface, the cracks she usually kept hidden from everyone else. I leaned forward, not daring to interrupt, only listening. The weight of her words sank into me, filling the silence with something deeper than I could name. "You're more than the rules," I said finally, my voice steady though my heart raced. "And maybe no one else sees that, but I do." Her eyes lifted then, meeting mine across the table. And for the first time, there was no barrier, no careful mask. Just her, a woman who had spent too long carrying more than anyone should. The moment stretched. The steam from her cup curled between us like a bridge, and I could almost feel the warmth of her breath as she exhaled slowly. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but her hand lingered there, almost trembling, as if unsure whether to hide or to reach. I wanted to reach back, to cover her hand with mine, to promise silently that she wasn't alone. But instead, I let my gaze soften, hoping she could read everything in my eyes that I couldn't yet speak aloud. When she finally looked away, it wasn't with dismissal. It was with hesitation, as though she had felt the same pull, the same quiet current carrying us somewhere neither of us had planned to go. That evening, I walked away knowing something had shifted. She wasn't just my teacher anymore. She was a woman, complex, vulnerable, beautiful in her strength and in her weariness. And for the first time, I realized that the rules we spoke of weren't walls. They were only doors, waiting to be opened. The next time we crossed paths, it was different. She carried herself with the same calm precision, but there was something sharper in her eyes, as though she had spent the hours since our last conversation building walls she thought should never come down. We stood alone again, this time in the library. The world outside was hushed by twilight, streaks of fading sunlight slipping through the tall windows and painting the room in gold and shadow. I had stayed late, as I often did now, but I wasn't surprised when she appeared. It was becoming a rhythm neither of us admitted to, yet both obeyed. "You know this isn't right," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying a tremor that betrayed her heart. She stood at the edge of the table, one hand resting against a stack of books as if the firmness of the paper could anchor her. "There are rules for a reason. If we're not careful—" Her words trailed off, swallowed by the silence. I rose slowly, not to challenge, but to close the space between us. "If we're not careful," I repeated gently, "we'll keep pretending this doesn't matter." And it does. She shook her head, but it wasn't conviction. It was resistance against herself. Her hand tightened around the spine of a book, knuckles paling, before she set it down with a quiet thud. Her shoulders lifted with a heavy breath. "You don't understand," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "For me, it's not just about what I feel. It's about what it means, what it risks." Her vulnerability pulled at me more than any rule ever could. I stepped closer, slow enough that she could have walked away if she wished. My shadow fell across hers, merging on the polished wooden floor between us. "I do understand," I said softly. "But maybe the things worth feeling are also the ones worth risking." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. My hand hovered near hers, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Close enough that I knew if I closed the distance, something fragile would break. Not shatter, but transform. Her breath caught. She looked up then, and her eyes met mine, not as teacher to student, but as woman to man. In them I saw everything she tried to hide: fear, longing, and the weight of choices pressing down on her. I didn't touch her. Not yet. Instead, I let the moment stretch, my hand suspended in the space between us, my voice no more than a whisper. "I won't cross unless you let me." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, alive with unspoken words. She closed her eyes briefly, as though steadying herself against the pull. When she opened them again, she didn't step back, but she didn't reach forward either. It was enough. Enough to know the conflict wasn't just mine. Enough to feel that somewhere beneath her hesitation, her heart was already leaning toward me. That night, when I finally left the library, the air outside felt different. Charged, as though a choice had been made. Not aloud, not in action, but in the quiet honesty of two souls who could no longer deny what was happening between them. It happened on a night when the campus was almost deserted, the kind of night where the air feels suspended, holding secrets in its stillness. I wasn't expecting to see her, but some part of me wasn't surprised either. By now, chance meetings felt less like coincidence and more like inevitability. The library was dim, lit only by a handful of lamps that cast pools of warm light across the long tables. The scent of old paper and leather hung in the air, mingled with the faint rain that had seeped in through open windows earlier in the evening. I sat with a book open in front of me, though my eyes weren't truly on the page. They were waiting. When she entered, her presence seemed to shift the room itself. She moved quietly, her scarf draped loosely around her shoulders, strands of hair falling in soft waves that caught the golden glow of the lamp. She didn't scold me for staying late this time. She didn't need to. We had long since passed the point where rules were the language between us. She crossed the room, her steps slow, unhurried, as though the silence belonged to us alone. She sat across from me, placing her things on the table without a word. For a moment, the only sound was the faint rustle of paper and the creak of the wooden chair beneath her. I slid the book aside, no longer pretending to read. She noticed, her lips curving into the faintest trace of a smile. Not amused, but acknowledging. Our eyes met, and the air between us grew charged, humming with everything we had left unspoken. When her scarf slipped from her shoulders, falling soundlessly to the floor, I leaned down and picked it up. The fabric was soft in my hands, carrying her warmth. I held it for a second longer than I should have before extending it back toward her. She reached out, and this time, our fingers overlapped. It wasn't an accident. Her hand lingered against mine, warm and delicate, her thumb brushing ever so slightly against my skin as she took the scarf. A simple gesture, yet it felt heavier than any confession spoken aloud. I didn't let go immediately, and neither did she. Her breath shifted, shallow but steady, as though she was weighing the enormity of something far greater than fabric. And in her eyes, those steady, guarded eyes, I saw the walls faltering, the rules bending, the truth breaking through in silence. No words passed between us, but none were needed. That moment, that brief overlap of hands, that quiet refusal to pull away, said more than any declaration could. It was a promise, a confession, and a risk all wrapped into one fleeting touch. When she finally withdrew, her scarf now safely draped back across her shoulders, she lowered her gaze, a faint flush rising in her cheeks. Yet even as she looked away, her lips curved in the smallest, quietest smile, one that told me she knew exactly what she had admitted without saying a word. And me? I sat there, my heart pounding, knowing the silence between us had finally spoken. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was heavy and gray, and the next it opened with a roar, rain falling in sharp, urgent sheets. I had been crossing the courtyard when I saw her, hurrying toward the narrow awning that jutted out from the side of the building. She reached it just as I did, both of us ducking beneath the shelter at the same time, breathless from the sudden downpour. The space was small, barely enough for one person to stand comfortably, and now the two of us were pressed shoulder to shoulder. The rain drummed hard on the tin above us, the sound of constant, rhythmic thunder that drowned out the rest of the world. It was just us, suspended in that little pocket of dryness, our closeness more overwhelming than the storm outside. Her blouse clung faintly at the edges, damp from the dash across the courtyard, and a loose strand of hair stuck to her cheek. Without thinking, I lifted my hand to tuck it gently behind her ear. The gesture was soft, careful, but my fingertips brushed the warmth of her skin, and in that single touch, the whole world seemed to narrow to the space between us. Her breath caught. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, conflicted, but alive with something she no longer seemed able to hide. "This is against the rules," she whispered, the words trembling but not firm. Her voice held no threat, only the faint echo of resistance she was still trying to hold on to. I leaned closer, my voice low, nearly drowned by the sound of the rain. "Then maybe the rules are wrong." For a moment, we stood there, so close I could feel the heat of her body against mine, the faint rhythm of her breathing matching my own. Her hand twitched at her side as if she wanted to reach for me, but couldn't let herself. I lifted my own hand, not to take hers, but to hover just above it, offering, waiting, leaving the choice to her. The air between us felt electric, charged not only by the storm, but by the weight of everything we had carried in silence. A single movement, one step closer, and everything would change. Her eyes flickered from my lips back to my gaze, and for a breathless second, I thought she would close the distance. My heart hammered so hard I wondered if she could feel it through the narrow space left between us. But instead, she closed her eyes, leaning just enough that I could feel the whisper of her breath against my cheek. Not a kiss, not yet, but so close that the world tilted on the edge of it. "I can't," she murmured, her voice breaking like the storm outside. And yet, even as she said it, she didn't move away. We stayed like that, close, trembling, caught between what we feared and what we wanted, until the rain began to soften, the storm easing around us. And in that fragile pause, I knew the rules had already been broken. Not by words, not by touch, but by the undeniable truth of what lived in her eyes when she looked at me. The storm had passed by the time we stepped out from under the awning. The night air was cool, fresh with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Puddles shimmered across the pavement, catching the glow of the street lamps, scattering light like fragments of gold. We walked slowly, our shoes splashing softly in the water, our silence louder than words. She kept her gaze ahead, her expression carefully composed, but I noticed the way her hand brushed against her side, as though fighting the urge to reach for mine. Every step felt like a decision, every breath like a question neither of us wanted to voice. At the gate, she finally stopped. The lamplight fell across her face, softening the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, revealing not weariness but something gentler, a quiet surrender. She turned to me, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. For a long moment, all she did was study me, her eyes filled with something I could no longer mistake for denial. "You know this can't be easy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the dripping rainwater. "There will be questions, consequences. Rules don't simply disappear." I stepped closer, careful, deliberate. "Maybe not," I admitted, "but rules aren't meant to erase what's real. And this, whatever this is, it feels real to me." Her eyes softened, flickering with emotion, and for the first time she didn't look away. Instead, she let out a quiet, trembling laugh, the kind that comes when resistance finally breaks, when you stop fighting the truth you already know. "Perhaps," she said, her voice steadier now, "some rules were meant to be broken." The words lingered in the air, carrying more weight than any confession could. Slowly, I extended my hand, not demanding, not forcing, but offering. A bridge, a choice. For a second, she hesitated, her eyes flickering down toward it. And then, with a deep breath, she let her fingers slip into mine. Her hand was warm, steady, her touch neither hesitant nor rushed. It wasn't the touch of someone careless. It was the touch of someone who had chosen. We stood there, hand in hand, as the world around us softened. The rain had quieted to a whisper, and the night hummed with a calm that seemed to mirror the relief inside me. She looked at me then, really looked, and her smile was different, small, fragile, but alive with a kind of peace I had never seen on her before. Without another word, we began walking. Our joined hands swung gently between us, a simple rhythm that felt like a promise. The puddles glistened under our steps, the lamplight painting a path ahead. In that moment, it didn't matter how complicated tomorrow would be. Tonight, we had chosen, not recklessly, not blindly, but with quiet defiance and tender certainty. And as her fingers curled more firmly around mine, I knew that some choices, once made, could never be undone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more slow-burn romance stories. And in the comments, tell me, would you break the rules for love?